Welcome, everyone. We are here for the DVSS SVSS contract renewal webinar. My name is Zach Wilson. I am the operations director here at MCA DSV. Hopefully everyone can hear me fine and you're not having any technical issues. I want to remind folks that we are on Zoom, so if you aren't familiar with the features, there are a few functions that you have on the bottom of your screen. One is to mute and unmute yourself. Everyone should be muted at this time, but if you do have a question, feel free when you have an opportunity to unmute and talk. Also, though, there's a chat function at the bottom. You can directly chat individual participants that are here, or you can chat directly to the group. Janelle Williams, our grant management specialist, is helping me out on the call today. She's going to be reading your chats and asking those questions. So that may be the easiest way if you have a question. So if you can type it in there, but we'll also have time at the end. I am recording this phone call, this Zoom call, so that we can post it for others to be able to see. So you should be able to reference back to this. I will probably cut it off during the question and answer time just to make it a little bit simpler. Please feel free to contact us with any technical assistance that you may need after this. I'll say it many times, but I want to just kick it off right at the beginning. We are here to help you out through this process. It is new, right? This is not a new grant to a lot of people here. This is a renewal. It should be familiar to everyone, but it's going to look different this year. Some things have changed, as has a lot of things in our world. The pandemic impacted the state budget, thus that impacted a lot of things that were funded through the state budget. So we'll talk about that as we go through, but know that it is a little different. So we are going to be available for you. Everything is going to be due back by August 28th. But again, this will be another repeated mantra I have. You have time, but don't feel you have to use it all. You need to get these back in and fully executed before you can start invoicing. We're already at the end of July, so I know you all have July expenses that need to be reimbursed. So get the contract documents and everything back in as quickly as you can. DSS has stated that they are going to try to turn things around as expeditiously as possible. So the quicker we get our end done, the quicker they can do theirs and get you all the much needed funding that you deserve. So, like I said, this is looking a little bit different for us. So to kind of just give a little bit of background information of where we find ourselves today, we are talking about two of our traditional core services. So we have the Domestic Violence Shelter Services, known as DVSS. And then we also have Sexual Assault Services. It's kind of known as SVSS, even though technically the acronyms don't match up. It's just the way it's kind of called and people talk about it. Collectively now, though, everything is kind of just going to be referred to as DVSS. All these different funding structures are falling under the same pocket, even though they're different line items in the state budget. They're for different services. We're going to have to track things separately, but just in the general vernacular of what's going on, when people refer to DVSS, they're going to be referring to 6 different funding sources. And we'll go through all of those in detail. So traditionally, these funds were basically through 3 funding sources. We had state general revenues that supported domestic violence shelter services and also sexual assault services. We had the Family Violence Prevention and Services Act funds. These are federal funds that came in and supported domestic violence services, so DVSS. And then a few years ago, I can't remember exactly the year, but there was some cuts in HUD funding, and we were able to open up TANF funding to support that. So TANF dollars also came in, Temporary Assistance for Needy Families. So those were redirected TANF dollars that went to support domestic violence services. Those fell under TANF DV and TANF Emergency Shelter. So those were our traditional funds. Well, like I said, nothing is traditional anymore. Things have changed. Everyone's had to adjust. So part of that adjustments was whenever the state budget passed, the governor withheld some state general revenues for the simple fact of there aren't going to be revenues available. So instead of taking cuts, I feel very blessed that we had the ability to have federal funds redirected to support this contract. So that's what happened. So Voca dollars, Victims of Crime Act, that was redirected to support and cover what was traditionally covered by general revenues. So that is your DVSS state contract as well as your SVSS state contract. So those dollars were traditionally covered by general revenues, not available. So there they went. Voca then replaced them. So if some of you are thinking, that sounds like supplanting, because of the non-existence of the revenues and them being gone, that's where it's not that being an issue. So, but because we're bringing Voca dollars into play, we bring with it all the regulations that are attached to those dollars, thus changing some of the dynamics of your contract. That's why now our contracts are looking different. Now it's split into two different contracts, with one contract being that traditional mixture of federal funds with FIPSA and the two TANF sources, and then the additional FIPSA CARES Act dollars. These were dollars that were designated from the CARES Act in response to the pandemic that added additional money for FIPSA programs. So this was a separate line, so that's why now we have two different FIPSA grants. There's the FIPSA line item, which is traditional, and then you have your FIPSA CARES Act. That is smaller. The way they determined that was just a prorated share. The state got X number of dollars, 500,000 and some change. They looked at the eligible providers and their totals of what they got, figured out the percentage, and that's how they determined how much of the CARES Act dollars that you had. So that will be one contract. Your other contract will be for what used to be general revenue dollars. So state DVSS, state SVSS. Those are now becoming covered by Voca. So Voca brings in a lot more regulations than just state general revenues. There's not a lot of regs that are attached to that. They have a purpose, but there's not a lot of regulations. Voca definitely does. Some of this, I know there's a lot of people on the call that have a Voca contract. I have a Voca grant already. They're already a Voca subrecipient. So a lot of things will be similar to how you're already doing your Voca grant. But again, another repeated mantra. This is the one to write down. Keep them separate, right? Just because Voca is coming in and paying through two different contracts doesn't mean you can combine them. You need to keep them separate. Even as we're going through and looking at our budgets, you'll want to keep your Voca DVSS and your Voca SVSS, tracking those separate. They're going to come in the same contract, but you want to make sure that you can keep your eye on that and track those funds separately. The same for the other one with FIPSA and FIPSA CARES and TANF DV and TANF Emergency Shelter. Those will be invoiced together, but you'll still be tracking the budget separately, reimbursement separately, so treat those separately. Have them be different pots of funds that you look at as a whole. So I'm going to go into everything in a lot of detail and make sure that I give it as much information as I can to help make this easier. But that's really what we're looking at. So in the vernacular right now, it's DVSS Voca, SVSS Voca, right? It's our FIPSA, it's our federal. We're keeping those things separate from what the Voca grant is. We're just pretending right now that none of y'all have that. Set off to a side, different project, and then we're really focused in on what's this budget look like? How does this fit into my organization's budget? Where do I need these dollars the most? And we'll talk about all those different allowabilities, the invoicing and reporting as we move through. But just to take a pause and look at the background of this, right, of where we find ourselves and how this is a little different. Does anybody have any questions? I haven't really seen anything in the chat specifically. If you have a question, feel free to go ahead and unmute right now. I think we don't have a lot of people that'll be talking. Claudette, did you have one? Hold on, let me unmute you. Are you, there you go.
Okay. As far as the invoicing then, are you saying we're going to have a whole nother separate invoice to
Yes.
do?
Yes, we'll talk about invoicing at the end, but there will be a separate invoice for both of these contracts.
Okay.
The DVSS Voca, SVSS Voca invoice will look very similar to your Voca grant, but it will be different. We've worked with them to change the title and change some invoicing numbers and that kind of stuff, just so that you're keep those separate.
Good, thank you.
Rolling through the screens, don't really see anybody else, so we'll move on. So you all should have by now received your email directly from DSS procurement. Should have come from probably Ann Perkins. You should have received that with all of your forms included. So you should have received, I believe, a total of 5 attachments. You should have received a memo that just kind of outlined the entire process. You should have received a funding chart that kind of broke down all of the allowabilities. You should have received 2 separate contract renewals. Now, anybody that just has SVSS and is just renewing that, you would have only gotten 1 contract renewal, so that you would be slightly different. But if you had state and federal DVSS, you'll get 2 separate contracts. And then you'll also have a sample budget form. So those would be the different pieces that would make sure that you got those in. And we'll go through all those different attachments, but just make sure that those are there. If you missed them, they were turning them out. They had to do them individually to everyone. So if you're missing one of those things, reach back out to them, get that attachment correctly, let me know, and we can look at it as well too. Janelle, I saw a couple things in the chat. Was there like some questions that needed to be answered? You're on mute, Janelle. So,
sorry, I've only been using Zoom, for
yes.
4 months now. It's okay. Yes, the first question was, will everything except for Voca DB and Voca SB be considered federal?
So, no. Everything will be considered federal. Voca is federal. TANF is federal. FIPSA is federal. All of these things will be federal. And that'll be something I'll be talking about, kind of the ramifications of some of these changes. Some of you all will have to be prepared for an A133 audit. I'm going to say it now so you can start thinking about it. You expend more than $750,000 of federal funds in 1 year, it raises the threshold of your audit. If you have questions about this, Paula will happily talk to you about it, but so can I. But essentially, it's a little bit more intensive. It's definitely more costly. It's a deeper level of audit. So what used to be state GR, and we didn't have to count it that way, nope. It's a federal fund. If it starts as a federal fund and hits your pocket, it's a federal fund.
The other question we had was if we've heard anything about how they're going to deposit, if it's going to be 1 lump sum or in 2 lump sums per contract or per category, such as 6, because currently they receive funding from DVSS in 1 lump sum for all 4 categories.
So what it most likely will be, because of processing, is 2 payments, because they'll be on 2 separate contracts. So that's what I anticipate. I doubt they'll be joined in the SAM2 because it's 2 separate contracts.
And the last question that we have is that if they've had someone in the past who has been paid a percentage through Voca funds and a percentage through DVSS funds, can they now be claimed through the Voca funds in the new contract? And then now that is all Voca percentage.
So this is where it gets confusing. All right. And this is where I think where I'm once again going to say, reach out and let us talk through some of these individualized circumstances. Because in the reality, those people that were on Voca and on DVSS, at any time, you could have shifted them into Voca to open up DVSS dollars because they were providing eligible services. You were being able to move some dollars and do those different things. But at this stage, you're still going to want to keep them separate. Yes, they're all going to be tracked by Voca. I mean, for the ones that are on the contract with the Voca dollars. But it won't be reported together. They won't be invoiced together. They'll never really cross paths until they get to the federal level. And that's when they'll all be aggregated together. But we've got to keep them separate. So treat them as DVSS just like you used to. Now, those budgets, like I said, and whenever I talk to people and they're having either funding issues or they just want to look at what's the best use of their dollars, because those two funding sources were so aligned, DVSS and Voca, there was a lot of flexibility between the two. Now we have just as much, if not a little bit more, since it's covered by the same regulations. Any other questions?
That's all I have in the chat.
Perfect. All right. So in those, in that, like I talked about with those attachments, you should have seen, I'm not going to do the screen share because I know this kind of messes up with some of our accessibility stuff, but you should have seen a form that looks like this, right? That is our allowabilities kind of funding source cross-reference sheet for you. It's a really quick, easy cheat sheet, right? But the biggest thing that I want to let people know is your guiding documents are your Voca regulations and your FIPSA regulations. So if you go to the Federal Registrar, pull up those regs. Also, I'll drop them on Basecamp so people can just have a direct link to them. That is the guiding document that tells you what you can and can't do. This is a summary of that document. So everyone should have gotten this. We helped develop this for DSS and they sent it out with the package. So it kind of breaks down what are the core services that are covered by this? Where does that break into? Can we do administration? Where's operational and contractual cost? All that kind of stuff. As you have seen in the budget categories, those are all very similar in what's allowable in the overall budget categories, but it's very good to know what activities can happen within those categories. But if you're looking like general overall, can this grant cover personnel? Yes. Can the grant cover administration? Yes. Operations? Yes. Indirect? Yes. Contractual? Yes. Equipment? Yes. Repairs and renovations? Yes. No. Repairs and replacements. Sorry, not renovations. Repairs and replacements, yes. Now you have to follow your rules on cost allocations and what are your prorated percentages. Again, keeping these things separate, right? But all those things are still allowable. But when we're looking at the bigger picture, some things that used to be allowable under state GR are no longer allowable, right? We lost some prevention in our state GR dollars. We used to be able to do prevention activities. Good thing is it's still available in the federal side. We can still do it under FIPSA. Batter intervention, still allowable underneath federal. So there's still a lot of those different kinds of things that we can do. Transitional housing, it's allowable under Voca regs. So we can do it now under DVSS Voca, SVSS Voca. So those things are all great. Fundraising, no, can't do it. Lobbying, no, can't do it, right? That's our traditional stuff. Other than that, things are very, very open. We got to make sure we keep our cost allocation principles straight. We got to make sure that we're tracking all our funds, having all our documentations the way we need them to be. But overall, those things are allowable. So I didn't know if anybody had any questions on allowabilities, where to find things. Like I said, guiding documents are those two primary federal regulations, Voca and FIPSA.
Zach, we did have a question about activity sheets. Will they be required to keep Voca activity sheets as they do with their other Voca grant.
Yes. Yes. Those requirements that you're doing currently with your Voca grant are going to carry over. You're going to keep them separate. They're not going to just do if they're on Voca grant and DVSS grant. You're going to have to track those things a little bit separately. There may be a way to combine them and streamline that, but you're going to have to look at that and be intentional. But yes, you will need to have those activity sheets. All right, so I'm going to move now into the actual forms and get into it a little bit. I'll put them up in reference. Hopefully everyone has theirs so they can reference those as well. Again, as a reminder, due 5 o'clock by August 28th. You'll email those to them. They provided the email contact, but it's dfas.dfas.dsscontracts@dss.mo.gov, right? It's on the forms. You'll submit that, all of your contracts to them, but get it done as quickly as possible. The faster you get it done, the quicker you can start invoicing, get your dollars in, the faster then we can move into other things and they don't have to continue worrying about these contract renewals. Let's get them done as quickly as we can. So with those documents that you received, so you should have received 2 separate award documents that were basically your contract numbers, would be how the file name was. On those, inside the budget forms, you would have gotten an award total. We'll go into it whenever we get to each of those. But that award total should be very similar to what you were already receiving. You may see some fluctuation, but you'll see the one additional piece of the CARES Act dollars. That'll be the new money. Everything else should stay about flat. If you saw what was your last year, your DVSS state, which is now DVSS Voca, if that's a little bit lower than it was last time, double check your TANF DV, because we'll see increases, our TANF emergency shelter. You'll see increases in TANF to kind of offset that. There was additional dollars in TANF, so some folks may have seen an increase in TANF. I think that was all the way around for those of you that got TANF dollars. The only one that did go down is the SVSS. So sexual violence dollars did go down by about 1/3. We are working to see about different ways that we can get those dollars increased. But right now, what you got in your award total is the amount. But if you want to cross-reference it, about a 30% decrease from what you got last year. If that number is wildly different, please let me know and I can cross-reference it. But like I said, let us know if there's any significant changes, but you should stay a little flat with maybe an increase in TANF with a decrease in SV. So kind of that balancing out, but seeing us staying a little bit flat. So we'll go into contract 1 first. So contract 1 is your FIPSA, FIPSA CARES, TANF domestic violence, and TANF emergency shelter. That's those forms. So this is essentially the traditional renewal of last year's contract. You'll see on the signature page that came in first, the few updated terms and conditions that they're changing in your original contract. Everything else in your contract will remain the same, all right? So this is what traditionally we would have seen if we wouldn't have had to have that replacement with Voca dollars. So that's why we had to drive out another contract. So they've shown the additional terms that are in there. There will also be some amendments to this. There were some things that we noted that needed to be updated. So they will be going in to update that as well. So likely you will see a revision to these amendments, but it'll get finalized before your final contract is executed. So this will also be a signature page that you need to return to them. So with contract 1, you have those early amendments, and then it ends with a signature page. The signature page needs to be signed, scanned, sent back to them with the rest of your documents. Then we move into the renewal budget forms. So you're gonna complete each section. That's a 1-page section, 4 different awards, 4 different sets of budget categories. You got 4 different tables on that page, right? This is your overall budget categories. It's not a line item budget. You're just looking at your budget categories: personnel, benefits, travel and training, supplies and operations, equipment, contractual, indirect. Those are your typical budget categories. Everyone should be pretty familiar with those. The total award should be pre-populated for you. So that's where they would have indicated for you how much you're getting in each of these funds. If you have one then total award that is blank, you didn't get any money in that category. Hopefully, it should be because you didn't have any money in that category before, right? So again, if you see something significantly different, like, hey, I had TANF domestic violence dollars, and now it says 0. Let me know. We'll double check what we've got, and we'll make sure that there wasn't an error. Or, hey, I never had this before, and now all of a sudden I have these dollars. It could be great news for you. Yes, we have additional TANF dollars. You're getting some money. It could be, no, this is an error. Let's go back and figure it out. So anything that is different, let us know. We'll double check things. So you only need to fill out the budget categories for those that were pre-populated for you. So if there's a 0 and it's meant to be a 0, don't worry about that. Disregard it. It doesn't apply to you. If you've got a total award in all 4 different categories, great. You get to develop 4 budgets. You're the lucky one. So develop all 4 of your budgets, put those things in there, fill out those, make sure they total your award, right? As is with most budgets, it is fine to round up to the nearest dollar, round down to the nearest dollar, make it easy on yourself, use whole units, do all that fun stuff. So after that, you have 2 other pages that just have some blank text boxes for you. You'll want to go ahead and fill that in with a brief description of services and a brief budget narrative. Literally, y'all, this is a half a page block. We can be brief here. This is a contract renewal. You already submitted a proposal that told them everything that you're doing, all the fancy things. You've already justified everything. You already told them all your great stats. This is not a competitive bid process. Don't make this harder on yourself, right? Put in there the description of services. What are the core services you're going to provide with these dollars? We're going to do hotline. We're going to do case management. We'll provide bed nights. What are the core services that you're going to do, right? We're going to operate a 24/7 shelter. What is it that you're going to provide? We're going to do medical advocacy. We're going to have hospital advocacy. That is sufficient. Then when we get into each of the different budget narratives, you want to provide a way of how you're coming up with those grand totals, right? But we don't have to break it down. If you're going to be paying somebody and they get a raise, in January, we don't have to break all that out like we typically did in our grant structures or what people are familiar with DPS grant applications. All that justification isn't necessary. This is a budget narrative allowing them to understand how you came up with those figures. So I'm going to pay for 20% of a shelter advocate at $14 an hour, 20 hours a week. Here's the total. And that's how you get to your different categories and build those up. If you need more room, yes, you can attach another sheet and pull over. But if you need more room, I would first suggest you look back and think about editing what you have, because you probably have too much. I really think that you are going to be able to fit things in these blocks. But if you need it, yes, you can add it so that they can sufficiently know how you're coming up with your dollars. So that is it for contract 1. You do those pieces and you're done. You put it together, submit it to the DFAS email. Make sure you put DVSS in the subject line, and that contract is up and rolling. Well, they'll review it. It's doing what you need done. Then they'll review it. If they have any questions, need additional information, deem something as unallowable, they'll contact you. You'll have that stuff done. But essentially, hopefully, you'll submit a budget. It'll get approved. They'll kick it back to you with an executed signature off you're ready to go to start invoicing. Submit your July invoice, and here you go. The invoice that is attached to that, what you guys already got, is already out of date. It's been updated. So there'll be a new one going out that's going to match a little bit better the actual budget forms, and be a little bit, I think, better to help track year-to-date expenditures, help us a little bit more in how we're tracking these dollars. But that is contract one. So contract one covers FIPSA, FIPSA Cares, TANF DV, and TANF Emergency Services, Emergency Shelter. Pretty straight contract renewal. Like I said, some of the amendment language will be coming out as updated. You still need to do your MSRs monthly by the 15th. You still need to do your outcomes at least quarterly. You still need to do one success story annually. All right? All that stuff stays the same. All right, so we are now going to go to questions, for contract one.
Yes. All right, so the first question that we have is the CARES dollar specifically for supplies related to COVID?
No, it's not. So it can be, but the way the regulations were written for the CARES dollars is that it can also support the normal activities of your FIPSA grant. So those things that were supported by FIPSA are traditionally supported by your DVSS, federal DVSS FIPSA, as people call it, can be covered by that. Was the intention to be COVID related things or to provide additional dollars because of the need for COVID? Yes, definitely. We also know that during the interim, other dollars have come in that have met that need. So if you project a long-term need, because unfortunately this is lasting a little bit longer than we all hoped, that you can use it for those direct things, but it also can just go ahead and support your typical regular FIPSA cost.
All right, the other question I had was about electronic signatures. Have you heard if they're allowing those?
Yes, because you can scan this and submit it back. We don't have to mail this in, so everything will be an electronic signature. I'll need to ask, I mean, if you're talking like a DocuSign or something along those lines, I think it will be fine, but I will confirm with them and post something on Basecamp.
Okay, and then the other question that I had was around the executive director being funded by DVSS, and with it going over to Voca, can we continue the DVSS funding for administrative and direct supervision services?
Yes, that would still be allowable.
Sorry, and then the last question I have is around desk audits. Do we know if they will be performing a desk audit separately from Voca, if there'll be two separate desk audits?
Honestly, no, I don't know. And I was thinking about that as I was preparing for this today. I could go both ways of like, it'd be nice just to come in and just get it all done at once. It would also be, that's a lot. So I don't know how they're planning on doing it. It's the same unit. Some of the dollars are going to be traditionally. I would imagine they will put them together, but there has not been a direct answer on that. But we will follow up.
And then I've got another question. Should we assume the CARES Act funding will only be available this cycle?
Yes, go ahead and assume that at this stage. Now, of course, there's legislation that's going through right now. Well, in negotiations right now, who knows what's going on. There's been talk about some additional dollars in FIPSA. There was rumors of some Voca fixes, but that may not be happening. I know Colleen probably have a better explanation of this.
Just real quick, there's the House version that was passed much earlier has additional funds for domestic violence services through FIPSA and for sexual assault services through grants that are administered over in public safety, the Sexual Assault Services Program, the SAS grants. So those made it through the House. The Senate is negotiating over those, looking more friendly at the FIPSA funds and for some reason not so much at the sexual assault. And there's also a lot of negotiations over there on doing some fixes to stabilize the funds that comprise the Voca funds. So it's in real time going on right now, that there perhaps is going to be an additional, not named the CARES Act, but another COVID-related bill of some sort. And just to make that point there, the increases that you might see on the forms are actually the FIPSA funds, not the TANF funds. So the TANF funds are stable. The federal streams that increased were the CARES Act, in those different categories. And maybe there will be more, but I wouldn't, like Zach said, I think it's probably at this point best to be cautious and be, just focused on the uses that I know you need for the current CARES Act funds.
And then Janelle, thank you, Colleen. Janelle sent in another, just some more clarification around executive directors. What I'm going to just let folks know is everyone's situation is a little bit different when it comes to executive directors and administrative positions. We got some smaller shops where people do a lot of direct services, right? And then we have some larger shops where they're completely removed from direct services, but it's still allowable. So everyone's allowability, whether it's by title, is a little bit difficult. It's much more by activities. So some of those individualized questions I think would be easier to answer on a direct one-on-one. But just so people know, yes, your administration is allowable underneath both contracts, right? It's going to be an allowable activity under both contracts, as is indirect. So look at what are allowable activities that you perform, and you can kind of look at how much is it going to be allowed for me to do. But like I said, we can talk about it a little bit more individualized in details through some TA. I know I'm available, Janelle's available, Janelle Williams. And then we have other people on staff that know it as well too. One thing I will point out though that I did not, when I was going through Contract 1's budget forms, please note that as is normal on the FIPSA dollars, so DVSS FIPSA, that does have match required. So that match is identified already. They already did the required match, what it is. So in your budget narrative, please let them know how you plan to meet that match. Of course, once again, it needs to be not just dollars in your hand, but expenses going out the door that support the project. So is it personnel? Is it equipment? Is it supplies? Whatever it is, how are you going to do that match? FIPSA CARES, the CARES Act dollars, they do not have match. So you're not required for match on that. So those additional dollars that we got out of the CARES Act, they waived the match of that at the federal level. So we do not have to worry about match with those dollars. So still, the only thing that you have to worry about with match, just as we always have, is that 20% on FIPSA. All right, we're going to now move to the one that I think is a little bit trickier. Contract 2. This is the one that's changing things up. This is the one that's introducing Voca. So I'm going to go through everything, but I will leave some time, of course, to answer questions and go from there. For those folks that are on the line that are not Voca subrecipients, right? Or also maybe aren't our member programs, because I know some individuals receive DVSS contracts, but they aren't members of MCA-DSV. We have a training and technical assistance contract through the Department of Social Services to provide assistance to you. So regardless if you're a member organization, if you're a DVSS subcontractor, give us a call. We can help you out with all this stuff. If you've never seen a Voca before and you're like, what in the world is this? Give us a call. We can help you out. We'll be able to walk you through it. It's not the most difficult thing, but we are adding some extra hoops that you did not have to do last time. All right, but this is what we have to do to make sure that we're not receiving drastic cuts in services. So I, for one, let's do what we got to do. Hopefully, this is a one-time thing. Revenues get back where they need to be. The state budget is where it needs to be. We don't have to worry about it moving forward. Does any of us know? No, we don't. But I know that's where our advocacy will be. We still feel like there is an inherent need for the state to support domestic violence and sexual violence services through state general revenues. They deserve it to their citizens, and we will continue to push for those dollars to get back to where they need to be in the budget. But right now, thankful that we're not cut. So moving into contract 2. Contract 2 was the big one of the group, right? That was the 72 page that burned up your home printer. If you're still working at home and you're like, dang it, I don't have toner for this thing. If you're at work, you could probably support it. But so big contract, we're not going to go through everything, but if there are, seriously, no, there are terms or conditions in there that you have questions about, give us a call, read them, take the time and read through the 72 pages so you understand what they are. Many of them will be similar to Voca, right? Because that's where a lot of this stuff is getting drawn from. This is what's happening because we're pulling in Voca dollars. But not all of them. Some of them are still going to be very specific to DVSS. So we need to make sure that we understand what those things are, what our expectations are, how do I need to acknowledge things, what are the rules for subcontracting, all that fun stuff. It's all laid out there for a purpose. If you get pinged in an audit and it's sitting in there, they're going to say it was there, we told you, right? So we need to take the time, read through it. Even if you've had this contract for 25 years, read through it, right? Even if you know what Voca is inside and out, read through it. That's where it is. So to finalize your submission for contract 2, you're going to need to submit 9 different items. 9. I feel like Ferris Bueller a little bit. 9 times. So you got to make sure you get all these different things in. We'll go through each of them, but I'll go through a few more in a little bit more detail that are a little bit not trickier, but have more information that you need to submit through it. So all that's laid out in that memo of everything that you need to respond to and give back to them. It's also in the budget forms to make sure that you go through it. But you got your big packet. Very first page on the packet is your signature. That's your signature page. Yes, you need to sign and return your signature page. You'll also get your award budget form. That looks very similar to your Voca budget form, right? But we're not going to use every field in that. We'll go through that a little bit more and a little bit more in detail, but the second item is your Voca budget form. The next one is your sub-grant award form. So we got to make sure that's attachment E in there, but that form needs to be filled out. Again, it looks very much like Voca, but we're not going to include our Voca grant. We're only specifically looking at Voca DVSS, Voca SBSS, just these dollars. We're treating it as a separate contract. Exhibit 1, that is also going to need to be returned. That's the business entity certification. It's very similar to most contracts you've done with the departments. It's your E-Verify certification. Since most of y'all are Voca subrecipients as well, you're most likely going to be submitting box C because you've already submitted that E-Verify stuff to the state. So fill that out, get it back to them, make sure those things match. If you have questions on what you need to do, give us a call, we'll let you know. Exhibit 2, that's number 4 that you got to get submitted in there. No, that's 5. I'm already losing track of myself. So exhibit 2, that's your certification regarding debarment. You need to complete that and sign it, return it. Exhibit 3 is your registration of your business name. Complete that and return it. Exhibit 4 is a federal form, the FFASA data form. All you need to do is complete it, sign it, return it. It's 2 pages. Make sure you do both of them, right? It's federal form. Click the ones that apply. If you have questions, let us know. Most of these forms are pretty straightforward. I don't think anybody will have difficulties with them, but if it gets confusing, let us know. There's a lot of them there. Finally, I'm very thankful for the response I got from DSS on this one. The dreaded vendor no tax due form from the Department of Revenues. To answer all your all's question, yes, this is the form that you already submitted for Voca that took you like a month to 6 weeks to get because they were way delayed. So unfortunately, yes, you have to submit it again. But your current, that form that you already submitted is current. It's valid. It's good for 3 years. Keep that someplace, because when we do Voca renewals in a year or so, you're going to need it again. It's good for 3 years. So keep it so we don't get locked back on that. Also know that that's always going to be a requirement. So when that thing's starting to come, that it's like, put a note on your calendar. You can get that renewed earlier, so you're not in the same rush as everybody else when we do those Voca applications next time. But it's good for 3 years. Submit it to them. You're good to go. If you don't have one of those, in the memo, it gives you the instructions on who you need to go ahead and request that from at Department of Revenue. It says allow 1 to 2 weeks. I'm going to say go ahead and give that some more time. Now, because 95% of you already have this form, I don't think they're going to get the same crush they did whenever we had Voca. But like every other state agency right now, nobody is at top-notch performance. Everybody is still figuring out remote and doing whatever, so who knows what's going on over at DOR in that department. So get on that now, get that submitted, so that can be something that you get to them right away. If you have lost yours for some reason, reach out to your Voca program rep. They should still have it on file. And then they can give it to you to give right back to them. But do our best, but luckily we can just use that form that we already have. It's current for 3 years. So I'm happy with that. So just in the general, those are all the exhibits and things that they have noted that you need to make sure that you respond back with. That is outlined in the memo. The one additional thing that you're going to need to supply yourself is a budget narrative and outline of services. This is brief. It can be just a Word document that you attach at the back of all the other things that you have and submit as one big PDF. Use kind of the same format that you did with your Voca application if you have one of those. But again, it does not have to be a justification. You're not in a competitive grant. You have already received this award, right? Let them know what you're going to do with it, what are the core services you're going to provide, and how does your budget, how did you tally up that budget to give those budget categories? Give them the narrative they need so they can see where those costs are coming from. Other than that, that's all it needs to be. Like I said, in the thing, this is 1 to 2 pages, right? It doesn't have to be a lot. So keep it short, keep it sweet, tell them what you're doing, have all that stuff lined up. So other than the budget form itself or the sub-award form, which I'm sub-grant award form, which I'm going to go into more details. Does anybody else have any questions about any of the other items I just went over?
Yeah, could you say the number again, the exhibit number for the no tax due exhibit?
No tax due form. It just
In
says
contract
it's
two?
noted it. It's not an exhibit.
Got it.
It's just, it's in the memo that you have to do it. It's not in. So you're going to reference it in the memo. It's on page 4. Well, it starts on page 3 and where you contact the Department of Revenue is on page 4 of the memo attachment. So it's not part of the actual contract they sent you. It's not an attachment. It's not an exhibit because you got to go get that form from them. But we submitted it to Voca for our Voca grant. So hopefully you already have it. So then I did see a question. Yes, and I'm happy to repeat it. The due date is August 28th at 5 o'clock to get everything in, but do not wait for that, right, folks? We're going to get it in as soon as possible. Yay. Okay. All right. So seeing no other questions, scanning through my photo gallery, I don't see people with their hands raised. So If I missed you, feel free to unmute yourself. If not, I'm going to go into the budget form. So like I said, so in contract 2 will be the actual budget form you'll fill out. It will already have some items subpopulated. One of the attachments that you got is the instructions for that form. So it'll look like this, kind of with circles and like the different pieces, and it gives you kind of like the 5 areas that you need to focus on. Great instruction page, tells you exactly where you need to go to. We'll walk through it a little bit on the full form so that everyone can see it. So go ahead, if you've got it, open up your form and we'll look at it together. So you don't have to fill out every field, but we're gonna let you know the ones that you do need to fill out. So in the first category, so the first block is organization information. Top of the budget form, organization information, fill out all of that. Everything needs to go in there. Make sure your cage code is up to date, have the valid cage code date. If anything needs to be updated, make sure it's there. Make sure all your organizational information is correct. And make sure that you are putting on here the actual contact person you want to be on file for this grant. Not just the person who is reviewing the form or putting it all together. It may not be your executive director, but who's your main contact person? Make sure that's the organizational contact person. That can be different than the authorized official that signs off on everything. But who's your main contact? Make sure that's there. You can change it as you go down the line, but let's just get things right as we go. All right. So now we're moving into the second one. The second block is the funding granted block. Guess what? Leave it alone. It's been pre-populated. You don't have to do anything with it. You're done with that section. Good job, everyone. You did fantastic. The next one that we go to is where we're going to start entering things. So this is the funding amount by category. So when you do this, it is only going to be driven into the appropriate year. So you're going to be in the funding period of July 1st, 2020 through June 30th of 2021, right? So that's that middle funding period. Again, like I said, this is very similar to our Voca grant, which had the 3 different funding periods. We don't have 3 different funding periods. We have 1 funding period, the state fiscal year. So June 1st, 2020 through June 30th, 2021. You've already got things pre-populated. In the total award on that column, you should have had the pre-populated amount already dropped in there. Currently, all of these dollars are going to be coming from the FY19 Voca award from the state. So all these dollars are going to be FY19 dollars. You're going to need to know that for your auditor. So this is their, like when they give you your contract, that's their disclosure. If for some reason they change and start pulling dollars out of, like say, hey, we didn't spend down FY17. We need to spend down FY17. The DSS process is supposed to be that they notify you and they send out a correction and saying, okay, now your dollars are coming out of FY17. But right now, they're FY 2019 dollars. It should be pre-populated in there. Don't go moving those to someplace else. Keep it in that column, right? So we're only working in that one column. That funding amounts by budget categories, it's got what? 9 different columns you could choose from. You only need to fill out one of them. It's the one that's pre-populated on the top. Drop that in, personnel, benefits, travel and training, all our typical categories, right? You will have the DVSS Voca and SVS Voca. Those dollars will be combined for this budget's purposes, right? So you won't do 2 separate ones, one for DV, one for SV. You'll combine them. So that's why that total will look like that. When you get down farther, that's where you'll split the 2 apart. But at this stage, you're going to combine them, all right? Fill in those things. The bottom will auto total for you, so it should match what's already pre-populated at the top. So that's the funding amount by budget categories. Pretty straightforward. It's the budget you create. You just drop your numbers in there, letting them know. Looks just like the same budget categories in contract one. So the next section is funding amounts by victim type. All right, so this is where in Voca is where we broke up. So this is how much we think will be DV, SV, underserved, whatever, child abuse, whatever different categories there were. Making it easy on you, right? You get a DV award, you got an SV award. Those things need to be the exact same as what's down in additional information at the bottom of the budget form. It tells you your domestic violence award amount is X. Your sexual assault award amount is X. Those dollars need to just go right up into the blocks for domestic abuse and sexual assault. That should also match section 5.1 of your contract terms. Section 5.1 just says what your awards were. Again, that should also match, but you don't have to go looking for section 5.1. It's right at the bottom of your budget form. They already pre-populated for you in additional information. So you take that, plug it right up in there. Again, you only have to worry about that one column in this funding period under FY 2019. So it's already been pre-populated as what the total is. We just have to fill out that one column. Everything else stays the same. All right? And that's the budget form. That's all you need to do with it. There's nothing else to it. There's a lot of other fields in there. They don't need to be filled out. Half of it is already pre-populated for you, right? Create your budget, drop those numbers in. Your budget form's essentially done. All right? Pretty straightforward. But with that, any questions about that budget form?
I don't have anything in the chat as of yet.
Thank you. All right. So the next thing that will need to be submitted is your sub-grantee award report form. This is in your contract. It's attachment E. Just the listed categories, different things you'll need to fill out. It is a 4-page form. Make sure we fill out the entire form. We're going to go through the SAR form right now, but it's pretty straightforward at the beginning. There will be some things that I'm just going to tell you what the answer is. It may not make sense, but this is the answer. In the SAR form, you're going to want to go ahead and number one, you're just going to fill in all your agency name, address, city, all that stuff, fill in the contact information. Again, who's your point of contact? That should match what you put on your budget form. Make sure those two things are the same, right? Same point of contact. One contract, one point of contact. Number 3 is the sub-grantee organization type. Pick the one that's most appropriate for you. Number 4, your project start date, of course, July 1st, 2020. Project end date, June 30th, 2021. The state assigned subaward number, that's your contract number. That's right back at the beginning of the form. It's on the signature page. It's up in the upper left-hand corner of the signature page. You can find it right there. It's also the name of the file that they saved it as when they send it to you as an attachment. That's your number. So just grab that, drop it in there. So for number 5, what you're going to need to click on, it's the purpose of this Voca subaward. You're going to want to click on B. You're going to expand or enhance an existing project not funded by Voca in the previous year. That's the one that you pick. That's the one the feds have said they wanted us to select for the purposes of this funding swap. Now, you may be thinking to yourself, Zach, I'm not expanding or enhancing anything. We're just doing what we do because it's what we got to get done. Right, and that's fine. You don't have to make something new. We don't have to expand stuff that we're doing. It's not an enhancement of services. It can be the same thing. It wasn't funded by Voca before. So Voca looks at it this way. So click B. I've already got it documented from DSS that that's the answer that they asked for. So we've got it in writing. We're good to go. That's the way it needs to go. So for number 6, it's the priority and underserved requirements. This is just where you indicate the percentages for these different categories, the different victimizations types. Pick the ones based on your award amount. That's your percentages. Should be pretty straightforward. You fill it in there. Pick the ones that are DV and SV related. We get a lot of different victimization types, of course, that you can pick, right? But you don't need to pick all of them. It's not a competitive project. You don't need to be like, well, one day we had a person walk through the door that had like 18 different victimizations. Do I need to click them all? DV and SV is the funding of these contracts. That's the funding and focus of these services. So that's what you're going to do. Again, you're going to base off your percentages based off of what you got awarded. Section 5.1 or additional information. Just what was your DVSS award? What was your SVSS award? Those are your percentages. Straightforward. All right, number 7 is your service area. Please designate what your service area is. Do it by county, do it by city. Make sure you're telling them everything though. On this one, do. If you are serving 8 counties, say all 8 counties that you're serving. If you're serving St. Louis County and St. Louis City, designate both. If you're like Def Lead and you're servicing the state of Missouri, state of Missouri. You don't have to write all the counties, just state of Missouri. So do what you can with that, but make sure you fill in your service areas. So number 8 talks about sub-grant match. Match has been waived on these dollars. So Voca match is not going to be required. So your answer is 0, 0, 0. And then for number D, match waiver, you say yes. You've already had, you don't have to submit a match waiver letter. Your match waiver has already been approved, but technically they are waiving match. So for match waiver, we'll say yes. No match required on this. All right. 9, use of Voca funds. This is when you're going to click through all those different categories that you're used to in your reporting with your, if you have Voca. So information and referral, personal advocacy, emotional support, shelter and housing services, criminal and civil justice assistance, assistance filing compensation claims. Click all the ones that apply on this one. That's fine. Like, check mark all the ones that apply, but use this as your reference point for your outline of services that you have to create. This is your cheat sheet. They're basically letting you have it. You can just write it back over and then fill in the gaps for the things that weren't covered by this. Very straightforward, very easy. Have those 2 things match up. Makes it a little bit simpler on yourself. Number 10 is types of victimizations. Again, this isn't everybody that you see. These funds are for DV and SV services, so keep them as DV and SV related. What DV victims do you see? What SV victims do you see? So adult, teenage, whatever it is that you serve, that's fine. Just go with those appropriate ones. We don't have to go into, yeah, we've dealt with people that have robbery. That's what you do with Voca grant. We don't need to do it with this one. These are very focused for these specialized victim services. And finally, number 11. Number 11 is where it's going to get a little bit, I don't think it'll be too tricky, but just you need to watch yourself and make sure that this is a place I think people may fall into the trap of combining their Voca grant, and we want to make sure that we're looking at our organizational budget as a whole. So number 11 is talking about budget and staffing, but it's talking about your entire agency. It's not talking about just this award. It's not talking about just Voca funds. It's talking about all your victimization programs. So you may be like, hey, we're a domestic violence shelter. That's all we do. Okay, then it's easy. It's straightforward. You may be part of a nonprofit that's a bigger umbrella organization that everyone doesn't do something in victimization services. So looking at that kind of stuff, you're going to look at what's the total budget for your entire victimization programs. This is everything. So it's all budget combined. If you are a domestic violence shelter that just runs domestic violence services and that's what you do, it's your organizational budget. What's your budget? Your sexual assault services center and that's all you do, what's your budget? But if you also are somebody that has multiple things, and maybe some of it isn't about crime victims, it's about other activities that you provide, then you need to separate those dollars out and just really look at the crime victim services that you provide and what are those costs. Your shared overhead costs, you need to use your cost allocation principles on how to separate those out. If you're having trouble with it, let us know. We can help you walk through it. You'll look at total funding that comes in to help your victimization program. So that's letter B, number 11B, and then it breaks down into B1, B2. You're going to just answer each of those things. So what are all the subaward, this subaward? Any other state or territory funds that you receive? Most of y'all aren't receiving any other state funds besides maybe SSVF out of DPS. Those are state dollars. There are a few other ones that are out there, so you may be getting them. But now that these general revenue dollars have gotten replaced by Voca, that was a big thing that used to be what people would count as state. It's a federal dollar. Any other local funds that you have, that's your unrestricted funding, that's your fees and fines dollars, United Way, all that kind of stuff. B4 is other federal, so any of your other federal dollars. So this will include all the money in contract 1 that would go into other federal, because that's your FIPSA, FIPSA Cares, TANF, other federal. This will include your Voca grant. This will include your STOP grant, your SASP grant. All those things will come into play with that, all right? And then the final one is any non-federal, those are your private foundations, any of that kind of stuff. All right, that should all total up to your total budget. So what you submitted as your answer to A should equal the total of all those sub-items in B. And we're talking about all your victimization programs, all your crime victim services. And then C is, okay, how many staff are underneath there? So how many staff are required, all of that. D, E, and F are focused more on match and volunteers. So again, match is not required. So we don't have to include match when we're trying to figure out how many staff do I have. I don't have match that I have to include. So we can look at all those different kind of pieces. You do have to have a minimum of 1 volunteer supporting the project at this time. Depending on the continued existence of this COVID-19 pandemic, that may be something that we get dropped at a later time, knowing that volunteers are difficult. But know that a volunteer for these purposes could be somebody on call at home on your hotline, right? That's a volunteer if they're not being paid, right? So we can look at it different ways, but 1 volunteer, it doesn't have to be match, right? Because match isn't on this stuff, but we do have to have at least 1 volunteer supporting the project as it goes through at this time. So does anybody have any questions about the sub-grant award report? The SAR.
Zach, can you repeat one more time? For number 10, do we select just DV and or SA or all that apply?
So for number 10, types of victimizations, you'll just want to select the ones that are related to DV, to domestic violence and sexual assault. There are like multiple ones that relate to those categories, so you may pick more than just like one. But you'll just want to make sure that you're picking the ones that are appropriate to DV and SV.
All right, and Zach, are we going to talk a little bit about reporting up next? Do you want me to hold on to that question, or are you ready for it now?
I'm going to go into budget tips, and then we'll go into reporting.
Okay, I'll hold
So
on.
we'll hold it for right now. Thank you. I appreciate it. All right. So when we're developing our budgets, because I mean, this is where we really have to be smart. We have to be strategic. We have to look at how these dollars can best not only meet my immediate needs, but also looking long-term. We've got a lot of different things that are playing off of each other. And you've got 6 different potential funding streams that all could be supporting similar services. So how do I best use these dollars? Number 1, continue to drive back to those allowable activities. Make sure what you're doing follows those regulations and is allowable, to just to be able to support your activities and support your work. We've got that funding chart to kind of give you those core services on what will be covered under what, for those primary direct services, but also know your administrative services, like I said before, are allowable. I strongly recommend, although it's not required by the state, if you want to think to yourself it's required by Zach, go ahead and do it. You need to develop a line item budget in Excel format for your own internal purposes. You need to know how you develop this. You need to be able to go back 6 months from now and be like, how did I get to this? But we also need to be tracking it, right? Looking at budget variances, seeing what's there. We have a 10% allowability that we can flex between budget categories. But if we don't know where things are tracking and we're not looking at budget variances as we go forward, we can't do that. So we can't do any of the internal planning that we need to do without that justification, without having that line item budget on. How did I come up with this number? Also, if you're going to go into any kind of contract adjustments or want to change your budget around, it just makes it much easier when working with your program representative to be able to give them the budget and say, this is where I want to shift this dollar to that dollar. It just makes things very less confusing. I find it much easier to work off an Excel spreadsheet. But whatever you're comfortable with, just make sure somehow, some way, you know how you came up with those budget categories. You can track that information. You can drive right into what developed that. It'll be very beneficial as you're developing your budget narrative, but please go ahead and do that. You'll notice that in each of the budget categories, there is an indirect line item. Indirect is allowable, right? So if you have a federally approved indirect cost rate, use it. If you don't, you can use the 10% de minimis rate. So 10% of direct modified cost automatically go into indirect. That indirect comes to you. Use it as you deem appropriate. So direct modified cost, it's your personnel, it's your benefits, it's supplies, it's contractual, and it's up to the first $25,000 of equipment. So adding those up, most of it will be most of your cost. I don't see people doing major equipment purchases with these things. It is allowable. If you need to do that, that's fine. But most likely it's going to be 10% of your reimbursable expenses each month. Then you take that dollars and you drive it into what you need to use it in. Do you need it for operational cost? Do you need it for reserves? They can go into reserves and pocket that for later to be then used to support your mission. All of those things are allowable when it comes to indirect. Use as you need. It can go over and be used to support other activities. What you cannot do is break out all of your operational cost and do a cost allocation on all your operational costs and request indirect. You got to pick one or the other. So if we're going to break out all of our operational costs, our rent, our utilities, all of those different kinds of things, we have then taken our indirect and figured out what is our direct cost through cost allocation methods. So pick one or the other. Sometimes it's more beneficial to break everything out, do a cost allocation, and break everything down in your operational costs. You can pull more dollars. When you do that, you got to make sure that you have your supporting documentation tracking all of that, right? If you go the other route and you spend most of these dollars on personnel and you drop everything else into indirect, pull those indirect down, and then you use that indirect money to pay for your rent, your utilities, or whatever you need that month. Great. Still fine to spend those dollars. Now I don't have to track that supporting documentation though, because I did it as indirect. My indirect supporting documentation is I did 10%. My math's on my invoice. These are my direct modified costs. So you got to just figure out what works best for you, but know that indirect is allowable and you can do it on one, not on the other. Like you can do it in Voca contract 2 and you can break them out in contract 1. I would try to stay as consistent as possible just to make it easier on yourself. But you can do that. You can't like really vary within the contracts, pick one or the other. But between the two, you can. Cost allocation plans, they can get really, really extensive. They can also be a lot easier than sometimes what we make them out to be, but we have to make sure that we have a cost allocation plan, something in policy that says, how do we determine how these shared costs are split amongst our different funding sources? It is not an acceptable method just to divvy it up by what I have as available funding. If I've got $500,000 in one grant, 250,000 in another, and 250,000 in a third, I can't just say, well, 50% of it goes to grant A because I have $500,000. That's not the way it works. It's not by funding amount. What you can do is you can look at a couple different ways, or give us a call. We can look at some other stuff. If you have an accountant, if you have your auditing firm, they can also help you out with these kinds of things as well too, to make sure you have a really well-established cost allocation plan. But you can break it down by FTE, full-time equivalency. So that's looking at your staff. How many staff positions do you have? Who's all on different, which funding sources? And then there we go. Then that gives you your percentage of what can be applied then for your operational cost across those funding sources. If you're looking at cost allocation around some operational cost or repairs and replacements or things that are more shared equipment, you can also look at usage or square footage as a different way to look at it, and looking at that percentage, like how much of this is the shelter, how much of this is administrative space, how much of this is my fundraiser space, and then figure out what those percentages are to do my cost allocation. Or if we're splitting it amongst the van, we use the van for different things. You can track the mileage, see what the usage is, and split it out based upon usage. Whatever it is, just make sure that you have a solid rationale for how you're making your decisions. You stay consistent with those decisions. You're not changing every other month. And then you can fully explain to an auditor, this is how I came up with it. Here's my supporting documentation. This is how I came up with the percentage. If you did it a couple of years ago, you may need to redo it, especially if you did it based off FTE or usage. If you did your cost allocation based off square footage and your building hasn't changed, it's probably still pretty solid. You can probably move forward with that. Remember to go back into all your contract terms and just know the general rules around contractual and equipment costs, right? If something is going to be above $3,000 and above, we need to get multiple bids, at least 3. If we're going to be $25,000 and above for anything, then you have to submit a RFP. You basically have to send out a request for bid and open it up to more folks. All of that's in the contract terms. If you decide to go down that route, let us know. Anything below $3,000, you don't have to do that stuff. It's considered a supply. It's not in a piece of equipment. So you can make supply purchases without going through those things. So a lot of your things that a lot of people would deem as equipment, but because of its cost, actually falls under supplies. So those things are allowable. And then I know there's a lot of folks out there that may be also looking at transitional housing, looking at counselors that they contract with, and those different kinds of things. Excuse me. All that stuff is fine. It continues to be appropriate and acceptable. Just make sure you reference section 4.3 in your contract, and make sure you know all your subcontracting conditions. Those are the exact same as your Voca grant. So it's good to make sure you're staying up to date on that. Make sure you're doing things the correct way. But just know what you need to do and make sure that you have in your contract language that you have with those people all the appropriate conditions that you need to have. So that is my budgeting tips. Kind of then moving into what we're looking at is invoicing and reporting. So again, please keep these things separate. It's not all going into one Voca grant. So if you track things by funding source, you may have to look at how you track things in your financial systems. Designate it as DVSS Voca, whatever you need to do to keep it separated. But you need to keep them separate because you will be submitting different invoices. So you'll submit a separate invoice for contract 1 and for contract 2. Now, in those invoices, you'll capture all the different funding sources you have. So contract 1 will have 4 different things that you'll fill out for each of the different funding sources. Then that will give you your total of what you'll be requesting for reimbursement. Contract 2 would have the invoice that will just be one thing, because remember, when we're talking about the budget for contract 2, we've taken the DV dollars and the SV dollars and we've put them together. Now, we're still going to want to be able to split those out at any time. That's right. If you can, keep those separate when you're tracking your expenses. Know what's an SV expense versus what's a DV expense. You'll have to note it on the invoice, so it should be pretty easy for you to do. But keep those separate so that you make sure you don't overspend your SV dollars or underspend, right? So we got to make sure that we look at those things. Reporting wise, so invoices, we'll submit those out. Same timing on all that stuff. Get them submitted after the month. You can submit one per month. And then typically you want to get those submitted before the 15th to get them paid quickly. Again, what we saw at the end of this state fiscal year will likely happen again at the end in June of 2021. So be prepared for that. Know that you'll have an early cutoff date to get dollars in to be reimbursed, but we anticipate still having that rolling expenditure period that lets you put in your final invoice on July 15th. So I do like that we transitioned. If people have been on this contract for a while, they've known that DVSS tended to actually like end around June 20th. Like you couldn't really get anything claimed past that, or else it rolled into your next contract. We can now go all the way through June 30th. You'll just probably have that early cutoff period, but they'll let you know well in advance, as will we. And then we'll have that rolling period that will pick up the rest of June expenses. Reporting wise, you are still going to be required to do your monthly service reports by the 15th of every month. You're still going to need to do outcomes at least quarterly. And you're supposed to at least do a minimum of one success story per year. All right. So you got to make sure you have all three of those things that you're accomplishing. You'll want to still break apart your DV MSRs and your SV MSRs, right? Those things are all going to be required. Everyone, since this is a renewal, should be familiar with our system, should be in the system already, should already be entering those things. We've got Laura Zond on the call. We have other member services specialists that can also help. Janelle's very familiar with the system. Feel free to reach out and ask us if you have any questions about how things should be entered, or if you're having any issues whatsoever with the system. Or if you've got a new staff member that's going to be responsible for it. Don't let them just go out there and figure it out themselves. Get them connected to us. Let's teach them the right way. We've got a lot of good, easy things that give some good tips and explanations. I think we're going to do an online recording of it, or we may have one. I'm not sure. I can't remember. But we got a lot of stuff that'll get you so that you're submitting MSRs correctly. For contract 2, you will also be required to submit Voca quarterly reports and Voca annual report. This will be in addition to your existing Voca grant reporting. Again, we keep them separate, right? So just for activities in contract 2, you'll need a report on those quarterly reports, 15th after each quarter. And then the annual report, it all drives together. The annual report basically creates itself as you go. You have some narrative questions that you have to submit at the end. All those will be laid out in the contract terms. You'll see where all those things are. Again, those few of you that don't have Voca grants and have never seen a Voca quarterly report, get connected to us early. We'll let you know what they look like so you can make sure your data is tracking that information. So it's probably best to try to connect to us a little bit earlier. Janelle is very helpful with us. But that way we can make sure that you're not then 2 days away from a quarterly report being due and you realize you don't have half the data that you need, right? Now, most of the data that you need is stuff that you're inputting into monthly service reports. So most likely you have it, but we can just talk about that and make sure you know the nuances of those reports. But you're going to keep them separate. They're going to be due at the same time as your Voca grant, but it's a separate report. It'll fill out the same. It'll look the exact same, but it'll be talking about these dollars, and it'll be just focused on DV and SV services. Just like everything, maintain your supporting documentation, because there will be site visits, there will be audits, right? We will have desk audits, there will be monitoring, we'll have compliance visits, all that stuff will continue. I would anticipate that they'll do those together. But like I said at the beginning of the call, I don't know. They may not, but we'll go from there. That kind of brings me to the end of the information that I wanted to make sure to get out to folks. I know that there's been several questions that come through the chat, so feel free if you have any more to go ahead and start plugging those in, and I'll have Janelle just kind of go from the top, and we'll go from there.
All right, Zach, we're going to start off with, we did have a question about where on the form do we track that volunteer? Do we put the volunteer information?
So on the SAR form, that form,
Yes.
it's on number 11. It's number 11 sub answers E and F. You'll do number of volunteers and number of hours. So if you drop in 1 and 1, that is sufficient. But if you think you have more, great, do it.
The next question we did have was around the budget categories. Do you recommend putting money in all budget categories so that way you can move dollars from one budget category to the other? Or if you leave one blank, will that lock it down so you can't use it?
Yeah. So like traditionally that was a way, and that was a tip that I would often give to people. DSS has traditionally not had that be a hang up. So it's not really a requirement. I mean, I am always one that I don't like leaving any fillable field blank. So if it's a 0, I will put in a 0. But that's just me and the way I roll. But it's not a requirement. It's nothing that will stop you from being able to move dollars, so you don't have to do it.
Thank you. The next question we have is attachment G4 requires the point of contact and the fiscal point of contact to complete the OJT financial management and grant administration training, which requires a grantee ID to register. Does anyone have this number, or can we give it?
So that is where it's the beauty of using federal forms at subrecipient levels. That actually is not going to relate over to you all. That is something that the state is required to do. I will confirm that and let folks know if they are going to be required to do that, but we have not been required to do that for Voca. I doubt we're going to be required to do that for this. But if that is inaccurate, I will make sure that information gets out to everybody, and we'll let everyone know. Because this number you would use would be the state Voca number. And to be honest, I don't have that off the top of my head. I know it starts with MO.
Next question we had was just a confirmation on attachment F, which is for equipment. Is that equipment only, not supplies? Or would you use it for supplies also?
No, so equipment, so the threshold is what actually creates something between what causes something to move from a supply to a piece of equipment. So if it costs $2,999, it's a supply. If that same thing gets raised by $5 and goes over $3,000, it now mysteriously turned into a piece of equipment. But it's more about the money threshold.
And once it reaches that 3,000, that's when you use attachment F, correct?
Yep.
And then a question about the reporting. Would you track your...
I'm sorry, I need to clarify something real quick.
Sure.
Attachment F, you do not need to use. Like, you only use that internally. That's your inventory. That's like an inventory thing. That's not something that you have to submit back to them. So just to clarify that. So if you are purchasing equipment, you need to track that, and it's an inventory, and that's a form to do that, but you are not required to resubmit attachment F, to my understanding.
And then also on the Voca reporting spreadsheets, would you use 2 different spreadsheets for the Voca report?
So for the Voca report, yes, but for like creating a budget and doing that things, yeah, I would use different spreadsheets in creating my budget. I would create like a master budget, but then I would create one for my DVSS allocation and one for my SVSS allocation. I mean, of course, you can have it on the same spreadsheet, but split those categories out so that it doesn't get combined, so that you are tracking your SV dollars and your DV dollars separately.
And then if you have direct service staff that are on both Voca and DVSS, how do you split up the quarterly report numbers?
So that's where you're going to have them. So it depends on how you're tracking your data. That's where things can start getting a little bit difficult, but it'd be the same way that we kind of tracked them out before. How did you track your DVSS numbers versus your Voca numbers? And you would track those into DVSS Voca. So whether it's based off updating your activity spreadsheets, or whether if you have a database, it's tracked differently in that. It may be a little bit more individualized to answer your question specifically, but we will have to be able to designate. So you will have to train your staff on what is their time, like what are they doing, what do I expect you, how do I expect you to split your time? And when they're doing those activity sheets, they can drop those services in the respective categories. We got to train up our staff to understand what their different categories are, what's allowable underneath those things, so that they can provide that appropriate data to us.
Would it be appropriate to use the amount granted for each contact to divide out the total served?
Yes, that's the way you should do it. So use those pre-populated numbers to figure out your percentages on how you're breaking out your victimizations, who you expect to serve that.
And on the quarterly report, can you use the percentage of funding to break those out between DVSS and Voca?
Yes. I mean, good, but each quarter may look a little different. I mean, that would be a guide, but because you don't know who's going to be walking through your door. Like you could be spending a lot of DVSS dollars in one quarter and have no SV clients walking through your door. So it really does depend on what services you're providing that quarter, but that's a good general. Now, if you're allocating things to administrative and operational, we got to look at how we're separating those out between DV and SV support. We can talk about that too, individually.
And then the last question, so if I missed your question, please retype it. But the last one that I'm showing is the volunteer. Does it have to be a direct service volunteer?
It does not have to be a direct service volunteer, but it has to be an allowable activity underneath the scope of the project. So most easily are direct service volunteers, but if you have somebody that's coming in and helping you run payroll, the hours that they spend specifically for the DVSS and SVSS Voca contract, that counts. So that could be an eligible hour. If you have them coming in and doing payroll, you can't count all their hours. You really got to focus in on the time that they spend on this contract. But that would be sufficient.
And I did have another question come in. So if it's a full-time staff and they serve the exact same number of clients under a safe house as they do under Voca, would it be the same number served so the reports would look similar?
Yes, if they're serving the exact same clients, yes, things would be exactly the same. That may be a little different. It does get a little confusing, but that's things that people needed to be kind of getting used to. Of if we have one staff person being funded by multiple different funding sources, we have to be able to figure out a way on how do we separate out what services go to what categories. You can do it based on FTE, but it can't just be your projected FTE. It has to be what's your actual split. So you may go into it thinking someone's going to be 50-50, but the way it rolls out is more 60-40. So you can split it as we go there. Or there are a lot of databases and you can track the data where you are saying, okay, I am doing a Voca grant service right now. And that client walked away and I'm done. And now I'm with this client and I'm going to do a DVSS service. It may be the same crisis intervention service, right? But I, as a staff member, am designating that because I know I need to be about 60-40 in my day, or I need to be about 75-25 in my day. But that's a little bit individualized. We'll talk to that. But yeah, if their service is looking the same, your reports are going to look pretty similar. Most likely, Voca grant is going to be a lot bigger because your Voca grant is going to be a bigger budget than your DVSS grants in reality as they break down, but they'll be similar.
All right, and then just one last technical. Are you going to post this on after the recording online, and where can they access it?
I am going to post this. I am recording this, and hopefully I will save it appropriately and be able to post it. Not having posted one before, and unfortunately, I don't know if Nancy is still with us. I think it'll be on the online training services. Oh, there she is.
I'm here. Yes,
me out.
I'll figure it out.
Do you know where we're going to drop it? The online training
I can
section?
I can do that.
So
Yep.
that'll be it. So on our website, you'll see education, and there'll be a sub tab for online, and then you'll be there, and then this recording should be there as well. I believe that we have the ability to also send it out as a video file. If that is accurate, I am going to test our updated list that we got of all y'all DVSS contractors from the department. We got an updated list of all the contact info for everybody. And so we loaded y'all into our system, and I'll test it by sending it out to everybody. So hopefully it'll go out to the contact as well too for everybody. So whoever was your contact for your previous award, that'll be the email address I send it to. So we'll post it on the website. Hopefully I'll be able to email it to you directly. And then if for some reason you still can't access it and you want to, just give me a holler and I'll send it to you.
That's all I have in the chat.
All right, everyone. Well, best of luck with everything that you're doing. You all are all rock stars. Don't make this more complicated than it needs to be. Think strategically. Think about the best use of funds. How can we take this and benefit our organization? Yes, contemplate CARES Act as being those CARES funds as being one-time funds. So what's the best use of these? Yes, look back at how you traditionally have spent these dollars, but what may be a better use of them now as we move forward. Could be the same thing. Could be I need to adjust some things. And when in doubt, give us a call. Get them in as soon as you can, folks. All right. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.